Hey, welcome to the How to Podcast series. I have Tamzin with me. Tamzin's in the UK. Ta-da! And she's here on the podcast as a co-host. And we're going to have her back many, many times. So this is not just the only time you'll hear from Tamzin. Tamzin is a great co-host to have on the podcast. And I love doing these is to kind of balance out the smaller episodes that we do to kind of give some instruction, some coaching, and some help. These co-hosted episodes are longer, I understand, but the topic and the conversation helps you. And what we've kind of envisioned, Tamzin and I, as we did our pre-chat before recording, was us having a conversation about a topic and inviting you to come and sit at the table with us and participate. So if you want to participate with your voice and not just with your ears, head over to the website, links in the show note, and give us a voice message, and we'll bring it in to a future episode and include your voice, your comments, your suggestions, your thoughts, your challenges, whatever. We'll add you to the podcast. It's happened before. It'll happen again. And the only one that can make it happen is you. So head over to the podcast website. Again, show notes down below or in your app or wherever you're listening to this. Check out the website and click that little microphone button on the website, record a message, and we'll bring you into the podcast. So we're going to be talking about all things interview-ish. We're going to be talking about everything to do with how to be a great guest, how to be a great host, and just some tips on mindset and all things to do with interviewing on the How to Podcast series with my guest, co-host. It's not an interview. Tamzin Hall from Tamzin Hall Coaching in beautiful UK. There we go. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the podcast. I have a great guest from across the pond from me here in Canada. My guest is Tamzin Hall. Tamzin is with me, and we're going to talk about all things podcasting, interviewing, and mindset. How's that? For people that are wanting to start a podcast, or you're a new podcaster, you're in the right place. This is the right location, the right classroom. You're in the right spot. Tamzin's here. Tamzin, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I am super excited about our podcasts. I've put an S on the end because we've got a few coming up, haven't we? Not just the one.
We do. I think we are now going to be new best friends.
We are. I'm very excited about it.
What do you think about that?
I love it. I love it. And I'm so excited about how we can help your audience and new people and how we can really make a difference in this subject and this area because it's so important, isn't it?
That's right. And to be clear for everyone, this is not an interview. We are co-hosting together. We are equally attacking this topic, and we're going to bounce ideas back and forth and share our thoughts. And Tamzin has some amazing background in history, and she just comes with so much knowledge. I can't wait to unpack this. It's going to be a lot of fun to talk to everybody. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Great to have you.
It's great.
So where are you overseas? Where are you across the pond from me?
Okay, so
where you are.
Now my geography isn't great, so I'm not going to give north, east, west, whatever. I don't know that, but I am sitting on the south coast of the UK, so I'm as far as you can go by the sea in the UK.
It must be beautiful. Like, it must be gorgeous.
It really is. Yes, yeah. I do feel like we're having a few turbulent times here at the moment. Politics, economy, all of that. But the weather is fabulous. I love autumn. It's autumn here, and it is my favourite, absolutely my favourite season. I love autumn. So it's great. Nice. It's great. And I love being by the seaside as well. So that makes me happy.
Yeah. And I'm over here in Canada near Niagara Falls. Big hill.
Okay.
Lots of water.
Yes. Yeah. Waterfall. I know the waterfall. Yeah.
yeah, that's it. That's all it is. We have people come from around the world to take photos. I drive by it every day, and it's like, oh, yeah, Niagara Falls. But, yeah, it's a beautiful place to live. And it's our autumn as well, and our leaves are on the ground, and it's sweater weather. Everyone's getting their sweaters on. So, yeah, it's nice. It's really good.
So I have a question for you.
Beautiful.
I've just written an article, fun enough, about how we don't sometimes see what is in front of us. So you say you drive past Niagara Falls every single day.
Yep.
Have you got photos of Niagara Falls? Have you experienced it as a tourist?
Probably not. Like earlier on, like when I first moved here, yes. But whenever I meet people that move here, they like drop their bags and go straight to the falls. Like, I can't believe I'm here. Right. And it's gorgeous. Like, it's this roaring water and it's just like amazing. Right. It's a natural wonder. And you're like, oh yeah, you just seem to become, I don't know if it's not jaded, but you just become, it doesn't really catch your eye anymore. And it's sad, honestly. It's really, really sad that something so beautiful can be taken for granted. So that's my challenge. Is I'm actually going there tomorrow.
Okay.
I will go stop and stand at the top of the falls and soak it in. Yeah, you have to take a moment, right?
You really, really do. I used to live very close to London, and I was the same. I would go up to London, I would go past Big Ben, I would go past Parliament, Buckingham Palace, and I wouldn't appreciate it or take it in. So yes, I think we need to soak up what's around us because it's amazing. The world is beautiful.
So we got deep right off the bat. I love this.
I know.
Take time, soak it in. Don't be so, yeah. I love it. That's great. So we're talking to podcasters. We're trying to encourage new podcasters. We're trying to encourage people that have been podcasting for a while, but maybe they're not seeing the results that they wanted to see right out of the bat. From your perspective, with all your history with helping people with interviewing and job search, and you've done so much over the years, I wanted to kind of tap into your thoughts for hosts that want to host a podcast with guests. Maybe some of your wisdom on finding the right guest or best interview ways to interview somebody. And it feels really odd to be talking to you like that because we're kind of co-hosting / interviewing right now, and I have a lot to learn just by having you here. So, how can we encourage somebody with a show on how to be a great host to their guest? What can we do?
So I'm sure, Dave, you're exactly the same. You've been a guest on many a podcast, and people do things very, very differently. I think my biggest piece of advice, and this is regardless of whether you are interviewing somebody for a podcast, interviewing somebody for a job, interviewing somebody for a date, interviewing somebody for whatever it is, be uniquely you. Don't try and be somebody else. Just be you. And remember your values. Remember what you want to achieve from it. So, for example, if somebody has a podcast on, let's choose Niagara Falls. So somebody has a podcast on Niagara Falls, but they have somebody who is interviewing or wants to come on the podcast to talk about Buckingham Palace. Is that aligned with your podcast? Is that going to help your audience? Is that going to help you? So my initial recommendation, and Dave, we did this. We jumped on a call a few weeks ago and had a conversation to see if we get on, we're on the same page, we're aligned. And if it doesn't work, and if you don't have that, not instant click, because you don't have that all the time, but if it doesn't feel right, or if you don't have that great conversation with somebody, or you don't feel like it's aligned, you don't have to have them on your podcast.
Good point. Yes, exactly. Right. Why, if the shoe doesn't fit, Cinderella, right? If the shoe doesn't fit, then that's not the right fit. So we're okay with that, and be okay with that.
Yes. It's the same as, sometimes we're so desperate for things, aren't we? It might be that we have somebody has a new podcast and they want to. They're desperate for guests on their show, and they think, I'm just going to have anybody. I want anybody to come on my show. It's the same as taking on clients. I want a client. I'm desperate for clients. I'm going to just take anybody. But that doesn't work all the time. And if it doesn't align and it doesn't feel right and the conversation doesn't flow and they have a different ulterior motive, then it doesn't have to be.
It's almost the same as when we're trying to pick our initial audience when we're building our podcast. We're deciding on who our target audience is and what they like, what they don't like, and how we can serve them. We're also, in a sense, eliminating who we're not going to be focused on for our podcast, right? Which feels a little bit weird because we want to reach everyone with our podcast. We don't want to say it's only for this group, but it's not for this group. But you can't reach everyone, right? So I have an example. I have a podcast called Dad Space. My Dad Space podcast is designed for dads. That's why I made it. And it's just to kind of encourage dads to be better spouses, to be better community leaders, parents, to be a better dad. And so I built my Dad Space podcast. I start looking at my numbers 6 months in, and almost 70% of my audience are female.
That is crazy.
I'm like, wait a minute. What's going on here? Right? I'm like, I'm talking to dads. It's geared to dads. We're talking to dads. But again, only 30% of my audience are dads.
And why do you think that is?
I don't know. I love it. I love that my audience is who my audience is. But I'm wondering, Tamzin, do I change my direction a little bit or do I continue? Because to have that kind of response means there's something there for people. Right?
So 2 things come to mind here. It could be that they are the dads are using a device that registered to their partner's name.
True.
So it shows up that they are possibly female. The other thing that springs to mind is it because women want to get inside men's heads and understand what's going on?
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking maybe as well, maybe there's some single mothers out there that are looking for some support, maybe with their children when they want to raise their kids. And that's another thought I had. But again, when you're creating a podcast, you have in mind who your audience is and who your audience isn't. And you build your podcast towards your ideal audience. In the same way, when you're interviewing and having guests on, you want to have your guests on that serve your podcast and your audience, and then eliminate the ones that don't, to your point. So we kind of in that same boat where whether you're building your podcast or having a guest on, you want to do everything to serve your audience. So how does your guest meet the needs of your audience? And if they don't, they don't. And the one thing I heard one person who has a lot of interviews, they said when they get pitched by people that are promoting guests, like a service, they say to them, it doesn't seem like this is a good fit, the person that you're pitching to me, but I'm willing to give them a chance. But just so you know, if the content of our interview doesn't meet the needs of my audience, I just reserve the right to not release the episode. I will do the episode.
Yes. Because my next question to you was going to be, how do you let people down when they want to be on your podcast? And I think that's a great way to pitch it, because some people, as humans, we don't want to let people down, do we? We don't want to tell them no. It's not something that lights us up inside, but actually that's a great way to have that conversation and to say, actually, this might not be the right fit.
But put it right up front.
Also,
right?
Yes. It also gives the interviewee the opportunity to research your podcast and to come with an agenda or answers or an interview that is going to be aligned for your audience. It's down to them to do some research as well. As much as it is for us as podcast hosts to research the people that we're interviewing, it's also down to the other side to do their work on it.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I love, if a guest could come to a podcast and approach the host and say, listen, I've been checking out your podcast. I've been checking out your content. You have a podcast about real estate. And I've noticed that in all of the episodes you've done, you've never had a lawyer on to talk about law and real estate. I'm a lawyer and I focus on real estate. I would love to come to you and be on your podcast and let's talk about this. Because in the minds of a host, you're coming with an answer to my podcast as a guest. You're saying, I can bring you value and here's what I can do. So as a guest, I would love to be a part of your podcast. Because the one thing that is, as a host and as a podcast creator, we're always building content. So when somebody sees a gap in our content and says, hey, I can help you with that, it's like, oh, great. Wow, you're not going to come and do another interview like the last 10 that I've done. You're going to give me something new. And I love that as a host. You know, yes, come on in. And it tells me that you've checked out my podcast and you've actually invested some time and listened to some of my episodes before you even reached out to me and said, I think I would be a great guest for you. Right? Because I already know what your content's about. That's amazing.
I think that's really important. Yeah, it really is. And I see that in, you know, obviously I have a background in corporate and in interviews and a potential employee who's coming to an organisation to say, I want to work with you, I've chosen you. That is a big green tick as far as I'm concerned. So the same thing, if you as a podcast host wants to be on someone else's podcast, just do a bit of research. Just spend an hour or so just listening to someone else's podcast, finding out about them and reaching out and saying, I want to be on your podcast because of exactly, Dave, as you've just said. It's so much more beneficial and it makes the host think, do you know what, let's get you on straight away. Let's bump everyone else down. Let's get you on. I want to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I love that in a job interview sense. Is there something dramatically different between a job interview and an interview on a podcast? Is there something that just is completely different?
I think my initial thought is no. Okay. In raw facts, it's in an interview, in a podcast, we're trying to get our opinion across, our answers across, show that we have the experience, we are capable of doing whatever it is that we're going to be doing. Yes, of course, there's some differences, but actually what we put on ourselves and the pressure we put on ourselves is a lot higher, I think, in a job interview because our salary or potential job is resting on how we perform versus on an interview for a podcast, you're still answering questions, but I find the majority of times, obviously there are some people that are very nervous and have worked themselves up into a bit of a state before going on a podcast, but actually there's a lot of mindset work that can affect, and I suppose it's the outcome as well. You know, I've interviewed people who they haven't had a job for 6 months and they need this job to put food on the table for their children. You know, that's the pressure that they are under to perform well in a job interview versus on a podcast. If I say to you, oh my gosh, Dave, I've just completely said something that I don't want recorded, can we stop and start again, or can you edit it? That can happen on a podcast. That can't happen in a job interview.
No. Yeah, for sure.
You can't say, excuse me, just forget I said that. Yeah.
That would be awkward for sure.
But we are so good as human beings at working ourselves up and telling ourselves a different story rather than just going into something relaxed, feeling confident, feeling in control, knowing that we know what we're going to say. If we can do both, if we can walk into a podcast interview or walk into a job interview or any type of interview with that confidence, then we're going to succeed. It's when we start to let that voice in our head start to say to us, oh my gosh, you said this wrong, you said that wrong, what have you said that for? And then we just, mind goes and we doubt ourselves.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the hosting side, a little bit about the guesting side. From your point of view, what would you say to somebody who is thinking about starting a podcast, and it's going to be an interview-based podcast? They have zero interview experience. They've never done this before. They've never hosted a guest. How do we find and land our first guest? And maybe some easy things that we can do as a host to make our guest feel comfortable in a podcast.
So, finding guests, you need to go back to your purpose for the podcast. So, for your dad's podcast, for example, you know the type of people that you want to be interviewing. And I would say initially, reach out to people you know and trust. Reach out to people you feel comfortable with and ask them to come and have a conversation with you. It doesn't have to be this static, rigid interview where everyone's really nervous. You need to be relaxed as a podcast host, but also you need to make your interviewee or your guest relaxed as well. Some people love to have questions. I'd love to know questions written down. I'd love to know, Dave, what you do with this, because I've been on some podcasts where we literally have questions and answers written down and we have to read from it word by word, versus some podcasts where there's no question beforehand. It's just we're just having a conversation. What I think for me personally, I like having maybe a brief outline as to what it's going to be, the subjects we're going to be talking about. Maybe I'll have, if I'm the host, might have 4 or 5 different questions down. Do I normally answer them? No, I don't. But if it gets tricky and I can't remember where I want to go, it's really useful to have them. That does help with making it more relaxed and making it fun for the host, the guest, and also the audience as well. What are your thoughts on that with terms of?
I always use a pre-interview, and the reason behind that is I get a sneak peek to my guest technology setup. I can hear and see if they sound good, if everything's working properly, without having to ask them any technology questions. Because if I meet you on day one and we're going to record right now, I have no idea if you're in a quiet place, if you have a microphone, if you have a good camera, how you are during a conversation. I have no idea. So when I hit record with you for the first time, I feel nervous as a host. So I always like a pre-interview, even if it's short, just to kind of build that connection. And as you talked about, to see if we can kind of talk and have a conversation. And when the question comes up about, do I offer my questions to my guests? I typically don't. And if they really adamant they want questions, I give them one. And they're like, why only one? I said, because the answer to your question will lead the rest of the conversation. So I don't want to be tied to a list of 5 questions where I'm reading to you from my list and not listening to you. Right, and you go into this great story about how your childhood and something that happened that was really pivotal in your life. And while you're telling this amazing story, I'm looking at my list of questions waiting for you to finish. And you're like, and that's how I saved the world. And I'm like, great. Question number 2. Right? And you're like,
oh my gosh. And the audience is thinking, what is going on?
What? She just told you how she saved the entire world, and now you want to know what her favorite food is.
Yep.
It's
It
like,
doesn't
wait,
work, does it?
no,
Yeah.
no. So pre-interviews I love because I can build a bridge with my guest.
Mm-hmm.
I can talk with them and share with them, and especially if I have a lot of brand new podcast guests come through my podcast, and about near the end of our pre-interview, they're like, so what is the interview going to be like? And I'm like, well, you were just on one. And they're like, I did it. I'm like, yeah. So this conversation we're having, that's all it is. And and the response back is like, I was so nervous about coming onto a podcast, but now I feel like I can do this. And that's exactly it.
Because it is, in effect, a conversation. There's somebody that's asking more questions than others, but it is just a conversation.
Right. Yeah.
But again, it's that mindset that makes it more and puts a lot more. We put pressure on ourselves as human beings, don't we? We put so much pressure on ourselves. And that then adds to the nervousness. Whereas as a host, if you can do that pre-interview that Dave does, it just puts everyone at ease. And makes the whole process so much more fun. And going back to your question, what would I recommend to finding people to come onto the podcast? If you have people that you invite, people that you know initially, invite people in your network, you can have a conversation with them. You know that they will respect you enough to be in a quiet place. You know that they will be willing to come on and give you 45 minutes now, half an hour of their time to support you, but also they're going to share your podcast afterwards as well. Because that's important, isn't it?
Yeah.
So go with somebody that you know you can have a conversation with, especially if you're nervous to start with, because it is quite nerve-wracking, isn't it?
And that whole idea about having your guest share your podcast. I know there's some people that are adamant that you must share this episode if you want to come on my show. And there are some people that I've talked to, Tamzin, that are like lawyers and doctors and professionals. And I don't even get to speak to them in the pre-interview. I get to talk to their people, which is weird in a sense, because I'd rather talk to them. But they're like, no, they're not available for the pre-interview. So what I say to them is, if I have somebody on like that, I like to search them up and search the other episodes they've been on someone else's podcast. And I listen to them tell the same story over and over and over. It's the exact same thing about their book or about their coaching or about their program. And they're just doing it over and over. And my question to them always is, I've listened to your other episodes elsewhere. You've got great content. I know you've already shared the story about your dog, your boat, and how you met your wife. I've heard those stories. Is there anything that you haven't had a chance to talk about? Is there anything you want to go deeper on in a topic that no one else has asked you yet? Let's make this podcast unique for you and give you a different content source that you haven't done yet. What would you like to talk about that's different than all the other stuff? And what that does to my guests is they're like, finally, I'll have something I can share because it's different than everything else I've done. And now I know they're going to share it.
Yes. Or have you had anybody that's gone, I don't know what to talk about now?
They're like, yes. Or they're so excited. They're like, I finally get to talk about this, And that gives me joy because now I know they're going to want to share it. I'm not going to have to ask. They're going to be willing to share it because we went somewhere different they've never gone before. And for me as a host, the other thing, Tamzin, that I really love is making a connection with my guest to the point where they drop their guard and they're real people.
Yes.
I had one guest on, a professional, very stoic, very presentable, very professional. And in the middle of the podcast episode, I asked a question again, they didn't know, and it's not a got you question, but I asked them a question, and you could see them just drop their facade, and they were like a completely real human being, and they started to well up because I was talking about something in their family and a moment that was really important to them that they've never talked about before, and they started to cry a little bit, and I was like, I don't know what to do here, but I stayed quiet, and they shared something unique and special, and after we were done, they said that was the most powerful moment for me. She said, I didn't even know we were going to talk about that, but it meant something to me as a guest. Thank you for the opportunity to share that story.
Wow.
And I was like,
wow.
Right? So if you can connect with your guest on a way like that, the listener that's with us in this discussion, if they can sense that real connection, it's not fake. It's not a list of questions. It's a real conversation. As a listener, I appreciate that, right?
Absolutely. And as a listener, you want your audience to be so engaged, they do not want to turn you off. You want them to want to listen to more. And by having moments like you've just described, oh my gosh, you're going to get that. You're going to get that magic that, yeah. And that comes from thinking outside the box.
Mm-hmm. So if you're a brand new podcast host and you don't feel comfortable to do that, questions, I'm not saying to a new podcaster you shouldn't have questions. I think everybody should have a plan for your episode.
Yes.
Don't just make it up as you go. You want to bring value to your guest, right? Because again, there's somebody said, who gets on a bus that doesn't have the location showing on where the bus is going? I'll just get on that random bus and hopefully I'll get to where I'm going. Everybody needs to know the location where we're going to end up. And in your podcast, you need to know this is where we're going to end up. So nobody gets on like a bus like that. So we want to be able to have a location in mind. Start with questions, but work your way out of them and try to find a way to have a real communication, real conversation without the need of a structured list of questions. Maybe it's a goal to work towards down the road for a new podcaster.
And be interested, just like you would if you were talking to your best friend. Be interested in what the person's saying and really listen, because if you really listen to what they're saying, the next question will come to you naturally because you'll be intrigued. Yeah.
So
it's No, go on. Go on.
No, it's really good, Tamzin. I have so many thoughts in my head, but having you here is amazing. Before we close off, because you got stuff to run to. You talked a little bit about mindset as a podcaster, as a host, as a guest. How do we get in the right mindset to come to our podcast interview, to come to our content in the right way to serve our audience? How important is mindset overall in what we do?
Now, I'm a believer that mindset and our beliefs are key to everything. And this is, I have a psychology background. Okay, so I'm all about the psychology, all about our minds. It is the foundation of how we are, what we believe in. We can talk ourselves out of something in an instant, or we can make it amazing in an instant. And so mindset's key. You know your stuff. You know what you're talking about. As a podcast host, even if it's your first podcast that you are launching, you still know your stuff. You know who your target audience are. You know what you want to get out of the podcast. You know it. You know how to have a conversation with somebody. You know how to ask somebody questions. And yes, you might have a few questions written down, to guide you, to help you. You know, I sometimes just, like I said earlier, have a few questions written down just in case my mind does go blank, or something's going on behind me, or something's going on outside and my focus is somewhere else. If I have a question written down, all is not lost. But you've prepared, you know your stuff. My biggest piece of advice is to anybody, schedule 15, 20 minutes before the interview to relax. Rest, relax, clear your mind. Whether it's you meditate, whether it's you do some yoga, whether it's you go for a walk, maybe it's you throw a ball for your dog, whatever it is, walk away from your computer, turn off all notifications, just clear your mind. Because if we're running from one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing, and if we have meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting in our diary, I can guarantee you will not be thinking about what's in front of you, because your mind will still be on what happened in the last meeting. Exactly. Or your mind will go back to that. And that isn't good for anybody. That is not good for anybody. No. If it happens, it's okay. Just try and bring yourself back and ground yourself back. And biggest piece of advice I have for that, if you're interviewing somebody, you're having a conversation with somebody, and all of a sudden you think, I forgot to get the chicken out of the freezer for dinner. And that's happened to all of us, hasn't it, right? That's happened to all of us. Maybe suddenly think, I forgot. Just bring yourself back by just putting your feet, I'm doing this with you, you can see, can't you? Put your feet firmly on the floor and just breathe and just feel your feet on the floor, listen to the person that's talking and bring yourself back to the moment. And then all's well again in the world. But having that clear mind and having that fresh headspace and not worrying about all the stuff will make you a better podcast host, interviewer, interviewee, guest, in corporate, in meetings, in interviews. I tell people all the time, if you have an important meeting coming up, if you have something coming up, give yourself space between meetings. I've got into a habit of scheduling meetings at 5 or 10 past the hour. So they start. So instead of starting at 4 o'clock, it will start at 10 past 4. And people always say to you, why on earth have you done that? And I say to people, because I'm sure your last meeting finished at 4 o'clock. What I've done is I've given you 10 minutes to go and make a cup of coffee, go and have a glass of water.
That's brilliant. I love that. That's great.
And that clears the mind. And that allows our mind to be focused, because our mind is so important. Our mindset is so important.
Tamzin, that is a great tip for everybody. I love that. I love it.
Yeah. And I can talk about this, Dave, for hours. Mindset and psychology and all of that is my thing. So I can talk about it for absolutely hours. But what it also does is it releases any stress, and it reduces that overwhelm that we feel when we try and pack so much into our days, because we do, don't we? We try and pack so much into our days. So that helps.
I love it. Okay, and so my last tip as we close off would be, when you're talking to your guests, make sure they feel special, make sure they feel like they are the focus of your podcast. But by avoiding this question, please don't say to your guest, thank you, Tamzin, for being on the podcast. I have a question that I ask all of my guests, and it is this. By saying to your guest, I have a question that I ask everybody, what you're saying to your guest is, you're not special. You're not any different than all of the other guests I've ever had. So I'm going to ask you the same generic question I ask everyone. And in that moment, it's like, oh,
thanks.
Okay, it's just the same question that everyone else gets asked. I'm not unique or special as a guest. So, all right. I like to not use that question. And it's just how it sounds. How it sounds to a guest is, I haven't spent time to prepare something just for you. This is just something that everybody gets. So I like to craft my podcast and make it special to my guest. So that's kind of one thing that I like to avoid is just stay away from that question or reword it a different way. Even if you do ask the same question, don't say to them, this is a question I ask everybody.
Because it doesn't make
it's
the other person
a little way
feel...
of wording that.
It doesn't make the other person feel good, does it? It makes you feel like, oh, I don't feel great now. Love that tip. I think that's great.
I love it. So Tamzin, we've taken a lot of your time. Thank you for being here with me. We're going to have you back for more and more and more and more, which I'm so excited about. But we have to share all the contact stuff. People have listened all the way to the end here with us. They're with us, so they're really interested. What do we do? Where are you most active, and how do we connect? What do we do?
Okay, so I am Tamzin Hall Coaching. I'm on Instagram and I have a website. So I'm tamzinhallcoaching.co.uk is my website, and that's my Instagram, Tamzin Hall Coaching. Nice and simple. I am me.
With our feet firmly planted on the ground, with 10 minutes before our next meeting.
Yeah.
Tamzin Hall. That's a great tip, Tamzin. I'm going to steal that.
Good.
I'm going to give you credit, but I'm going to steal that, and I'm going to tell people everyone needs to do what Tamzin's doing, because that is a brilliant way of organizing your day.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you for being here, and thanks for being part of this.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me, and I'll see everyone soon.